have kept this log for 22 years. I have recorded feeding refusals and feeding compliances, collar adjustments and collar failures, behavioral incidents and the official language required to describe them without assigning blame to anyone with a rank above my own. I have logged the night the second Vorrakh in the program tore through the containment mesh on level C and had to be subdued by the full garrison response team. 4 hours, 11 injuries, 1 fatality that the official record classifies as an equipment malfunction. I have logged things that made me go home to my quarters and sit in the dark for a while before I could sleep. I have logged things I believed, when I logged them, that no one above my station in the program hierarchy would ever actually read, which turns out to have been a reasonable prediction for most of those years. I am a pen-warden. I have been a pen-warden since I was 31 years old, assigned to Vorrakh Station's below-grade evaluation facility on a posting I was told would last 18 months, and which has now lasted long enough that I have outlasted 3 program directors and 1 complete administrative restructuring of the garrison's beast integration curriculum. My name is Bren Sath. I have no rank worth mentioning. I carry a monitoring board and a collar key fob and a data pad on which I record what I see. That is the entirety of my authority in this place. When I speak in formal settings, which is not often, my title is logged as Senior Facility Monitor, which is an administrative category that was created specifically to give me a title more dignified than Pen Warden, without giving me any additional access or compensation. I have found it useful primarily when I need to sign requisition forms. I am writing this entry not in the standard log format because the standard log format does not have a column for what I witnessed yesterday. I have tried to fit it into the existing fields and it does not fit. So I am writing it the way I would write a letter to someone who was not there. And I am going to be precise, because precision is the only tool I have left after 22 years of watching this program do what it does to the creatures in my care. I want to be precise about the Vorrakh first, because if you do not understand what the Vorrakh is, none of the rest of this will mean what it needs to mean. The Vorrakh is a bare canid designation. That is the garrison's official taxonomy, and it is accurate as far as it goes. 6-limbed, heavy-shouldered, dense-furred, in dark charcoal and black with lighter undertones along the throat and inner forelegs. The coat changes with temperature and stress. In calm states, it lies flat and the lighter undertones show. In threat states, it rises along the spine and neck, and the creature appears entirely black. At full shoulder rise, the Vorrakh stands 2.5 meters at the withers. It weighs, as of last month's measurement, 740 kilograms. The head is broad and flat-skulled, with forward-set eyes that have a golden luminescence in low light. Not a reflection, an actual bioluminescent quality, faint but consistent. The jaw is capable of crushing the structural alloy used in standard corridor. Partition panels. I know this because it has done exactly that, twice in the lower holding section of this facility. The Vorrakh is not a cub. It is not a juvenile in any biological sense. It is classified as juvenile in the program records because it has not yet reached its full growth stage, which the species does not reach until approximately 7 years of age. Our Vorrakh is 4 years and 3 months old. At full growth, it will be larger than what you are imagining right now. The species data in the program's reference library, which I have read, all of it, because I read everything related to the animals in my care, and have done so since my first year in this posting, describes the fully mature Vorrakh as the apex predator of its habitat class, with no documented natural predator across the 4 world zones in which the species has been studied. The entry includes a behavioral note that I have thought about often over the past 2 years, that the species is unusual among apex designation animals in its capacity for what the researchers describe as selective trust. Not domestication, not submission. The distinction the researchers draw is precise. A Vorrakh cannot be domesticated in the way that smaller social species can be. Domesticated because the cognitive architecture that domestication exploits The anxiety of the social animal that needs to belong to a hierarchy is not present in the Vorrakh in the same form. What the Vorrakh does, according to the research, is assess. It assesses every living thing it encounters against a set of criteria that the researchers have spent 40 years trying to formally identify and have mostly failed to pin down, and on the basis of that assessment, it either classifies the encounter as threat, as neutral, or as something the research literature calls pack-adjacent. Pack-adjacent does not mean dominated, it means recognized. In 2 years and 1 month, the Vorrakh has classified every person in this facility as threat or neutral. The researcher's third category has not, until yesterday, been observed. The garrison has had the Vorrakh in this facility for 2 years and 1 month. In that time, it has been assigned 3 handlers. The first handler, a trained integration specialist named Oriv Dal, was injured during an acclimation session in the 2nd week, not severely, but enough that she filed a transfer request the following day and was reassigned before the month was out. The second handler, a veteran integration officer with 11 years of experience whose name I will not include here because he asked me not to, was hospitalized after a level C behavioral incident in month 4. Both bones in his left forearm, significant soft tissue trauma to his shoulder. He returned to duty 8 months later in a different program at a different station. He sent me a brief message when he arrived at his new posting. He said the new station had smaller animals and that the weather was better. He did not mention the forearm or the incident. I have kept the message. The third handler, a large and capable young man named Torvin Sale, lasted 7 months before the Vorrakh broke 3 of his ribs and his collarbone, in what the official report describes as an unprovoked aggression event. Torvin would disagree with the word unprovoked if you asked him, but the official report reflects the program director's terminology, not Torvin's. Since Torvin's incident 4 months ago, there has been no assigned handler. The Vorrakh is managed entirely through the pain collar system, a titanium alloy band fitted at the base of the neck below the skull, which delivers a graduated neural shock on command from the program director's console. The collar has 7 settings. Setting 1 produces what I am told is a mild discomfort, roughly equivalent to a static shock. Setting 4 produces temporary paralysis of the hind limbs. Setting 7 produces unconsciousness. I have seen all 7 settings used in this facility. I have recorded all of them in the log. Program Director Kale Veth arrived at Vorrakh Station 14 months ago. He is not the worst program director I have worked under, which is a sentence that should tell you something about the ones who came before him. He is methodical, ambitious, and genuinely convinced that the pain collar system represents a more efficient approach to Apex Beast integration than the older behavioral bonding models. He has said this to me directly, more than once, in the administrative corridor during shift change overlap. He is not wrong that it is more efficient in certain narrow measurable ways. Feeding compliance, movement compliance, transport compliance. The Vorrakh eats when it is required to eat, moves when it is required to move, stands in the designated assessment zones when it is required to stand there. These things are true. What is also true is that the Vorrakh has not eaten voluntarily, without a setting 3 collar prompt in 11 months. What is also true is that it sleeps in the corner furthest from the gate, with its back to the room, and has done so for the entirety of Director Veth's administration. What is also true is that its coat, which in our intake records showed regular lighter undertone phases, indicating calm, now presents in full spine-raised black almost continuously, even during feeding, even during what the program log calls rest periods. What is also true is that when I do the morning holding corridor checks, the Vorrakh turns to face the wall when it hears my footsteps, not because it is afraid of me. I have been in this corridor enough times at enough hours that it has long since made its assessment of me, and the assessment, I believe, is neutral. It turns to the wall because facing the room requires acknowledging the room, and the room, for 11 months, has been a place where the collar fires. I write all of this down. I file all of this in the appropriate columns. The program continues. The cadet evaluation program runs quarterly. Groups of 10 to 15 cadets from the garrison's integration curriculum are brought down to the below-grade evaluation pit, a circular space approximately 40 meters across, with natural stone walls that predate the garrison itself and observation ledges, cut into the rock at 3 levels above the floor. The pit was originally a geological formation, a collapsed cavern that the early garrison engineers found and enclosed. The ceiling is high enough that the lighting rigs hanging from it feel distant, close to 20 meters above the floor at the highest point, and the stone of the walls has the particular texture of rock that has been shaped by water over a very long period of time, smooth in some places, ridged in others, in colors that range from pale ochre to deep brown, depending on the mineral content. I have spent more hours in this pit than in any other single place in this garrison, and I notice the stone. I notice it the way you notice things that have been in front of you long enough to become familiar without becoming unremarkable. The evaluation is not technically a training exercise. It is classified as an observational acclimation event. The cadets stand in the evaluation corridor, a semicircular arc cut into the stone at floor level, separated from the main pit floor by a reinforced mesh partition, and they observe a controlled behavioral demonstration involving one of the garrison's registered apex designation animals. The purpose, according to the curriculum documentation, is familiarization with apex class behavioral patterns in a controlled low-risk environment. The cadets are not required to interact with the animals. They are not expected to. The mesh is between them. Director Veth has, over the past 3 quarterly evaluations, developed what I think of as his demonstration protocol. He releases one of the garrison's animals into the pit floor, usually the Vorrakh, occasionally one of the Drell pair from level B, and uses the collar system to walk it through a series of commanded behaviors in front of the cadet cohort: stand, move, halt, turn. He docks this, narrating the behavioral responses, explaining the collar parameters. The cadets watch. The animal obeys. The point of the demonstration, as Veth delivers it, is that apex designation animals can be managed effectively by properly calibrated systems. The handler relationship is secondary. The technology is primary. This is the lesson he intends the cadets to take away. I watch from the upper observation ledge. I take notes. I do not offer commentary because my commentary has not been requested, and because offering unsolicited commentary to a program director is not within the scope of my role. I have tried in the early months of Veth's administration to file observations through the formal note submission process, the channel designed for facility-level staff to contribute operational data to the program review record. I have filed 11 such notes in 14 months. 7 have been acknowledged with a form receipt and no further response. 4 have not been acknowledged at all. I continue to file them. It is at this point a matter of professional principle. Yesterday's evaluation cohort arrived at the lower facility at the first hour of the afternoon shift. 14 cadets. I watched them come down the access ramp and assemble in the holding corridor while Director Veth delivered his pre-evaluation briefing. I have heard this briefing many times. I was not paying particular attention to the cadets. I was reviewing last night's monitoring data on my board and thinking about a feeding anomaly I had noted in the Level B records. One of the Drell had eaten a partial ration without prompting, which is unusual enough to warrant a note, but not unusual enough to warrant anything more urgent. I looked up when the cohort moved to the evaluation corridor. I looked at them the way I always look at cadet cohorts, quickly, cataloging the general shapes and sizes of the group, assessing the usual range of nervous energy, the ones who are genuinely curious versus the ones who are performing readiness for the cameras mounted on the corridor walls. 14 cadets. Standard range. Some larger, some smaller. A mix of species and ages within the enrolled parameters. Nothing that caught my eye initially. Then I noticed the one at the back. She was not notable in any immediately obvious way. Human female, early 20s, shorter than the average in the cohort, wearing the standard issue gray integration fatigues that every cadet wears in this facility. Her hair was pulled back. Her posture was not military correct, slightly too relaxed. A quality that I have come to think of as unfamiliarity with the posture requirements rather than deliberate indifference. She was not looking at Director Veth, who was still talking. She was looking past him, toward the mesh partition at the end of the corridor, where the access gate to the pit floor was sealed. She was looking at the gate the way someone looks at a door they are waiting for. I checked my board. Cadet cohort roster, pulled from the curriculum records, 14 names. I found hers. She was the last on the list, which is an administrative artifact of when she enrolled in the rotation, not a performance ranking. Sarah Voss, human, civilian enrolled, not a garrison-born candidate. Prior certification in agricultural monitoring, of all things. No combat scores on record above the program median. Behavioral assessment notes. Cooperative, attentive, occasionally distracted during formal instruction sessions. Nothing that would have flagged her for special attention. Nothing that would have indicated she was going to be the last person standing in the evaluation corridor when the Vorrakh came through the gate. That was not the plan, to be precise. The plan, as I understood it from the standard evaluation protocol, was for the cadets to observe from behind the mesh. The plan was not for any individual cadet to be on the pit floor with any animal, at any point, under any circumstances. The evaluation corridor and the pit floor are separated by the mesh partition precisely because the plan is observation only. The plan changed because of the access gate malfunction. I want to be honest about this. The gate malfunction was not the Vorrakh. It was not the program. It was a simple mechanical failure in the lower locking sequence, a component that I had flagged for replacement in my maintenance requests 4 times over the past 2 months, and which had not been replaced because the parts requisitions was still pending approval from Garrison Supply. This is not a complaint. It is a data point. When Director Veth released the Vorrakh into the pit from the upper access tunnel, which is the standard release point, designed to give the animal space to acclimate to the floor before the evaluation begins. The Vorrakh moved faster than the expected behavioral envelope. It reached the evaluation corridor gate in approximately 6 seconds from release, which is significantly faster than any movement I had recorded for it in the past 11 months. It hit the gate, the lower locking sequence failed, and the gate opened inward approximately 40 centimeters. In those 6 seconds, the cadet cohort had responded entirely correctly according to the emergency movement protocol. Veth had reviewed in his briefing. They had moved to the secondary position at the back of the evaluation corridor, away from the gate. All 14 of them had moved. All 14 of them except Sarah Voss. She had not moved back. She had moved forward toward the gate, not toward the open gap. She was not trying to push through to the pit floor. She had simply moved toward the gate rather than away from it, and by the time the gate had swung open 40 centimeters, and the Vorrakh had stopped on the other side of it, Sarah Voss was standing approximately 2 arm lengths from the mesh, looking at the animal. I want to record precisely what I saw from the upper observation ledge, because I am a pen-warden and precision is what I have. The Vorrakh stopped at the gate. This alone was notable. In the 6-second run from the release point to the gate, the Vorrakh had been moving in what I can only describe as focused aggression. Ears flat, coat fully raised. The low throat sound it makes that is not a growl exactly, but that vibrates in the stone floor in a way you feel before you hear. I felt it through the observation ledge railing. 3 experienced garrison staff standing near me on the upper ledge had all taken a step back when the Vorrakh hit the gate. 2 of them had reached for the personal restraint devices on their belts. I had not stepped back, but I had gripped the ledge rail. After 22 years of this work, my instincts are calibrated to this building and these animals, and my instinct, when the gate opened, was that I was looking at the beginning of a serious incident. The Vorrakh stopped at the gate and did not push through. It stood at the 40-centimeter gap and looked at Sarah Voss. She looked back at it. I have watched this animal for 2 years and 1 month. I have watched it in the morning when it is still and in the feeding periods when it is reluctantly compliant and in the behavioral assessments when it is at its most controlled and least calm. The tight muscle strain of an animal performing actions it has been shocked into performing. I know what it looks like when it is assessing a threat. I know what it looks like when it is about to escalate. The weight shift forward, the particular angle of the skull when it has made a decision about distance. I have never, in those 2 years and 1 month, seen it do what it did in the next several seconds. Its coat settled. Not completely, not immediately. It happened in stages, the spine ridge first, then the shoulders, then the neck, as if each part of the animal's arousal response was receiving a different signal and resolving it independently. The bioluminescent quality in its eyes, which in high arousal states intensifies to a hard yellow gold that I have learned to treat as an immediate hazard indicator, softened. It was standing fully black and flared at the gate, and within perhaps 15 seconds of looking at Sarah Voss it was, showing the lighter charcoal undertones along its throat that I had not seen on this animal in 14 months. Sarah Voss put her hand out toward the gate. Not through the gap. Her hand was flat, palm up, extended toward the mesh at the level of the Vorrakh's muzzle. A gesture that anyone with experience around large animals would recognize, and that anyone without that experience would not think to make. I did not know, reading her file, that she had that experience. I found out later, when I looked at her agricultural monitoring certification in more detail, that the work she had done before enrolling in the program had been on a frontier-grade livestock operation, on a colonial world in the outer circuit, working with animals that routinely weighed twice her body weight and that were described in the operation's safety documentation as requiring experienced handling at all times. She knew what the gesture meant. She knew how to hold her arm so the shoulder was loose and not transmitting tension. She knew to keep her eyes steady without staring, and to keep her breathing rate down to something the animal could read as neutral. She knew these things, not because she had been trained to know them in the garrison's curriculum, but because she had learned them years ago on a farm, somewhere in the context of animals that did not wear pain collars and were not classified as apex designation threats. The Vorrakh put its nose to the mesh. It was not sniffing in the threat assessment way, the rapid short inhalations that precede an attack decision, the data gathering of an animal determining the dimensions of what it is about to act on. It was a long, slow breath in and out, the kind that means something entirely different, the kind that I have seen in my 22 years, from a number of different species in a number of different contexts, and that I have come to think of as the breath an animal takes when it is revising an assumption. I looked at Director Veth. He was on the primary observation ledge, 1 level below me, with a clear sight line to the corridor gate. He was watching. His hand was on the collar console at his hip. He activated Setting 1. I know what Setting 1 looks like from the Vorrakh's body. The animal's head comes up slightly, and there is a brief tightening of the musculature in the neck and shoulder, an involuntary flinch response that is extremely brief, under 1 second, before the stimulus resolves. The kind of thing you notice if you are watching for it, and that you might miss if you are not. The Vorrakh's head came up. The neck muscles tightened. For 1 second, the lighter undertones along its throat were obscured by the tension in the coat. Then its head came back down, nose back to the mesh, and I watched it push through the 40-centimeter gap in the gate. Slowly, with deliberation, not forcing the gap wider but moving through what was there. The way a large animal moves when it is being careful rather than aggressive. It was inside the evaluation corridor. 14 cadets were pressed against the back wall of the evaluation corridor. I could see them from the upper ledge, a line of backs, and the visible tension in shoulders and necks, and the particular stillness that people settle into when they understand that any movement they make will be the wrong kind of movement. None of them spoke. Several of them were not breathing in the usual way. Sarah Voss was standing 2 meters from the gate, her hand still extended, and she did not move. The Vorrakh crossed the 2 meters between them and pressed its muzzle to her palm. I have used the word stopped several times in this account already, and I want to use it again precisely. Everything on the observation ledge stopped. Director Veth stopped. The 3 garrison staff members near me stopped. The 2 who had reached for their personal restraint devices did not draw them. Their hands were there, on the grips, and then they were still, and I became aware that I had stopped moving my stylus across the monitoring board, that I was simply holding it and looking down at the pit floor, with a quality of attention I do not think I have brought to anything in a very long time. Sarah Voss closed her fingers very slightly, not gripping, just curving around the top of the muzzle in the way you do when you want the animal to feel the contact without feeling restrained. I saw her thumb move once, slowly, along the bridge of the nose above the muzzle, a single calm stroke. The Vorrakh's coat, which had begun to rise slightly when the caller fired, settled again fully. The lighter undertones along the throat were fully visible. Its eyes had gone from the hard yellow gold of high arousal to the softer amber I had seen in the intake records 2 years ago, before the program had done what it had done to this animal. It stood in the corridor with a human hand resting on its face, and it was not in a threat state. It was in something I had no column for. Director Veth activated Setting 2. Setting 2 is, by the program documentation, a moderate aversive stimulus, classified as above comfort threshold and appropriate for behavioral redirection during non-compliance events. I have seen large trained garrison animals respond to Setting 2 by dropping to their hindquarters and vocalizing in distress. I have seen the Vorrakh in months past respond to Setting 2 by slamming itself against the nearest wall hard enough to crack the stone facing. The Vorrakh pressed more of its face into Sarah Voss's hand. I watched its eyes close partway. The bioluminescence was so soft now that I had to focus to be certain I was seeing it, a barely there amber warmth, the color of banked coals. Director Veth activated Setting 3. Setting 3 has a visible component. The Vorrakh's collar ring produces a brief luminescence, a pale blue-white band that travels around the circumference of the titanium collar over approximately 2 seconds. It is designed as a visual indicator for observers so that they can calibrate their distance expectations during administration. In the 2 years I have managed this animal's records, a Setting 3 activation has never failed to produce a significant observable response. Retreat. Vocalization. In one documented instance, a charge in the direction of the nearest target, which had been the second handler's forearm, I watched the pale blue-white luminescence travel around the collar band. Sarah Voss's hand had moved from the muzzle to the broad flat skull, between the ears. She was not pressing down. She was simply there, the weight of a hand, the way you rest a hand on something you want to reassure. The Vorrakh sat down. Not a collapse, not the hind limb paralysis that Setting 4 produces, nothing involuntary. It sat the way a large animal sits when it has made a decision about where it is going to be, settling its weight back onto its haunches, the spine straightening, the head staying at exactly the level it had been beneath Sarah's hand. It made a sound that I had to go back through the intake records to identify, because I had not heard it in this facility in over a year. The low chest resonance vocalization that the behavioral literature describes as a contentment signal in the Vorrakh species. The frequency at which an animal in this taxonomy indicates that it is, within the parameters of what its neurology permits it to feel, at ease. Not a growl, the opposite of a growl. The Setting 3 luminescence faded from the collar. 12 seconds. I timed it afterward, going back through the observation ledge monitoring footage. From the moment the Vorrakh had pressed its nose to the mesh, to the moment it sat down, beneath Sarah Voss's hand, 12 seconds had elapsed. In those 12 seconds, Director Veth had activated collar settings 1, 2, and 3 in sequence, each escalating on the previous, each failing to produce the compliance response the system is designed to produce. The Vorrakh had not responded to any of them. What it had done in those 12 seconds was come through a gate, cross a corridor, press its face to a human cadet's hand, and sit down. In the time since I have been writing this account, I have tried to find the language to describe what it looked like from the upper observation ledge, and I keep coming back to the same word, which is not a technical word and does not belong in a pen log, and I am going to write it here anyway, because I am not writing a pen log anymore. It looked like relief. It looked the way a thing looks when it has been waiting for something for a very long time and has stopped believing the thing would come, and then it came. I am a pen-warden. I am not a behavioral specialist, and I am not a veterinary clinician, and I do not have formal qualifications in apex beast psychology. I can only record what I see. What I saw in that corridor was an animal that had been managed by aversion for 11 months. And that was in the presence of this one specific person, doing the opposite of everything the collar protocol had been trying to produce in it for 2 years. Sarah Voss sat down on the stone floor of the evaluation corridor. I want to be clear. She did not do this because the Vorrakh forced her to. She did not do this in response to any command or suggestion from Director Veth or anyone on the observation ledges. She sat down on the stone floor, cross-legged, the way you settle when you intend to stay for a while, and the Vorrakh lowered its head into her lap with the deliberate carefulness of something very large that is trying not to hurt something much smaller. It took its time with the movement, bringing its skull down in stages, checking its own weight at each increment, adjusting. 740 kilograms of apex designation animal, resting its skull on the thighs of a human who weighed perhaps 60 kilograms, with a precision and a care that I would not have thought possible if I had not watched it happen with my own eyes from 20 meters above. The 14 cadets at the back of the corridor had not moved. I could see them from the observation ledge, pressed to the wall, not in panic, but in the particular stillness of people who understand that any movement they make will be wrong, and are choosing correctly to make none. A few of them, I noticed, had changed from the tension of the initial moment to something I might describe differently. Not fear, but the watchfulness of people who are seeing something they are not certain how to categorize. One of the younger ones, a tall male cadet near the end of the line, had very slowly and very quietly lowered himself to a crouch against the wall, as if reducing his profile, and was watching with his hands flat on his knees in the universal posture of a person trying to make themselves as small and non-threatening as possible so they do not interrupt something. Director Veth had not moved either. He was on the primary observation ledge with his collar console in his hand, and he was looking at the pit floor with an expression that I have had to think about how to describe, because I know his face fairly well after 14 months. And I am accustomed to reading it accurately. He is not a man who shows surprise easily. He has the settled quality of someone who has worked in high-stakes environments long enough that surprise has been trained out of his visible register, if not out of his interior one. What he showed at that moment was something more specific than surprise. It was the expression of a man who has built an argument carefully over a long period of time, who has documented the argument in reports and briefings and curriculum presentations, and in the procurement justifications for the pain collar systems, continued authorization, and who has just watched the foundational premise of that argument demonstrate its own limits in front of witnesses who were here specifically to assess the program. The Vorrakh's chest resonance continued at a low, steady frequency. Its eyes were closed. From 20 meters above, in the lighting of the evaluation pit, with the stone walls of the cave around it and the drain channels catching the overhead rig light in narrow, bright lines, the animal looked like something I had not seen it look like in 14 months. It looked like itself. Sarah Voss said something. I could not hear it from the upper ledge. The pit acoustics carry some sounds very clearly and swallow others entirely, and her voice was quiet in the way of a person who is not talking to the room. I could only read the shape of it in her lips and in the slight forward incline of her head. The quality of attention that someone who is talking to an animal brings to the talking, the small adjustments of proximity and tone that you learn when you have spent enough time with large creatures, to understand that the sound matters as much as the content. I believe she said easy. The shape of the word fits what I saw in her lips and in the slight release of tension across her shoulders when she said it. I could be wrong. It might have been something else entirely. The Vorrakh's breath deepened when she said it. The rib cage expanded slowly and released, and the spine ridge, which had been fully settled for several minutes, dropped another increment. A further relaxation I had not known the animal was capable of, because in 14 months I had never seen it achieve this level of calm in this facility. There are phases of calm I have recorded in the log. This was a different order. I wrote on my monitoring board, 14-22-7. Subject in contact with Cadet Voss, SE corridor, unprompted, no response to C1, C2, C3 escalation sequence. Full coat settle, chest resonance active, head down posture on contact surface. Then I wrote, voluntary. Then I looked at that word for a moment and decided to leave it. Director Veth spoke to the cadets. His voice carried the acoustic design of the pit very well. He has good projection, one of the qualities that makes him effective in front of a cohort. He said, in a measured and professional tone, that this was an unscheduled behavioral variation and that the cadets should remain in position while the situation was resolved. He said this in the tone of man who has used the phrase "the situation will be resolved" before, and knows how to keep his voice level while he says it. He activated setting 3 again. The luminescence traveled the collar band. Sarah-Voss's hand, which had been resting between the Vorrakh's ears, moved very slightly, not pulling away, just a small shift of pressure, the kind of unconscious adjustment you make when something near you changes, and your body registers the change before your mind does. The Vorrakh's chest resonance broke for approximately 2 seconds. Then it resumed. The Vorrakh did not lift its head. Director Veth activated setting 4. Setting 4 produces hind limb paralysis under normal operating conditions. The documentation describes this as a temporary motor inhibition stimulus. Duration 8 to 12 seconds depending on body mass and collar fit. I have seen it used 3 times in this facility. Each time the animal had gone down onto its side within 5 seconds of activation and had remained there while the effect resolved. It is administered through the pain collar. In my experience, the animal does not experience it as something other than pain, whatever the documentation classifies it as. The Vorrakh's hind limbs did not buckle, its head did not come up, its coat did not rise. The chest resonance continued unbroken, the same steady low frequency without variation. What it did, and I am recording this precisely, because I watched it from the ledge and I want the record to be exact, was pull its front limbs in slightly, adjusting its lying position, tucking them closer to its body. The way a large animal shifts when it is settling into a more comfortable arrangement for a longer stay, as if the setting 4 stimulus was a thing it had registered and had already but decided was not relevant to what it was doing. I looked at the collar console in Director Veth's hand. I could see the position of his thumb on the control surface from the upper ledge, and I could see that he had not released the activation control between setting 3 and setting 4, had gone directly from one to the other in the way you escalate when you need compliance quickly and the previous signal failed. I could not see his face from the angle I was at. I could see the set of his shoulders and his neck. And I know from watching people work in high-pressure environments for 22 years what it looks like in a person's body when the tool in their hand has stopped working and they are still holding it. 14 assessment program observers were on the upper and primary ledges. They were there because quarterly evaluations are formal assessment events, and formal assessment events require official witnesses from the relevant oversight bodies. I do not know all of their names. I know that 3 of them are from the garrison's Integration Curriculum Review Board, that 2 are from the Station Administrative Oversight Committee, and that one is a senior behavioral specialist named Veth Ossel, who sits on the review board for the Pain Collar program's continued authorization. I had spoken to Veth Ossel briefly in the access corridor before the evaluation began. She had asked me, in the careful, neutral way of someone who has done her reading before a site visit, about the Vorrakh's voluntary feeding rates over the past 12 months. I had given her the accurate numbers without elaborating on what those numbers meant, because she was a specialist and could read them herself. I thought about Veth Ossel now. I thought about the numbers I had given her and the 11 months of collar-prompted feeding compliance those numbers represented: the progressive coat state, the corner sleeping, the back-to-the-room posture, the 11 formal observation notes I had filed through the note submission channel. I thought about the fact that everything I had been documenting for 11 months was currently demonstrating itself on the pit floor, in front of the person responsible for deciding whether the Pain Collar program's authorization should be renewed. Sarah Voss's hand moved from between the Vorrakh's ears to the side of its face. Not scratching, just resting. The way you lay a hand against something warm and alive and present that you want to know you are there. The Vorrakh's muzzle turned fractionally toward the contact. Its breathing was deep and regular, to the extent that an animal that weighs 740 kilograms and has broken 4 people's bones in 2 years can be described as peaceful. It was peaceful. Director Veth walked down the primary ledge stairway to the pit floor level access door. He keyed the access code. The door opened, and he walked onto the stone floor of the evaluation pit with the lead line assembly in his hand, the heavy alloy leash system that is used for transport of the Vorrakh between holding and the pit floor, a chain rated 4,000 kilograms with a locking snap clip designed for the collar ring. I watched him cross the floor toward the evaluation corridor gate. The Vorrakh's chest resonance changed. It did not stop. It shifted in frequency, lower, with a different quality, a different intention in the sound. I know this sound. It is not the chest resonance of a content animal at rest. It is the chest resonance of an animal that has noticed something and is making a decision about it. Director Veth reached the evaluation corridor gate and keyed the emergency override. The gate unlocked. He pushed it open and stepped into the corridor. The Vorrakh rose. It rose in the deliberate way it had sat down, with intention, weight shifting forward, the head coming up from Sarah's lap with the same careful incremental movement it had used to lower itself there, as if the reversal of the action required the same care as the action itself. Sarah Voss's hand came away from its face naturally as it moved, not snatched away, just the ordinary separation of contact when something shifts position. The Vorrakh rose to its full height in the corridor, which meant the ridge of its back was near the ceiling, and it turned to face Director Veth. It did not make a sound. It did not lower its head for a charge. It stood between Director Veth and Sarah Voss, all 6 limbs braced and square, coat raised to an intermediate display that I do not have a classification for. Not the full threat black of its aggression state, not the settled charcoal of the past hour, something between the two that carried meaning I could read without having a column for it. A statement of position. Its eyes, facing Veth, were the hard yellow gold of full arousal. Director Veth stopped. He had the lead line in his hand and the collar console on his hip, and he had just administered 4 escalating settings and received no response from this animal, and now it was standing between him and the corridor floor with 740 kilograms of mass behind its assessment of the situation, and I watched him understand what was in front of him. He said something to the Vorrakh. I could hear his voice from the ledge, clipped, command register, the voice he uses when he expects immediate compliance. I could not hear the specific words. The Vorrakh did not move. He said something again. Still no movement. He took a step forward. The Vorrakh lowered its head to the level of his chest. Not a submissive lowering, nothing like that. A presenting of the skull, the broad, flat face forward and square, and made a sound that I have heard from this animal on 2 previous occasions. both of them immediately preceding significant physical incidents. It is a single tone, very low, produced in the thoracic cavity, not the chest resonance of ease or the growl of active threat. Something older and simpler than both. The behavioral literature in my records describes this vocalization as a terminal boundary communication, which is a formal way of saying that it is the last thing the Vorrakh says before it has decided that words are finished. Director Veth did not take another step. He stood in the evaluation corridor with the lead line at his side and the Vorrakh's skull at the level of his chest 3 meters between them, and he did not move. The Vorrakh did not move. They were like that for what the monitoring footage shows was 14 seconds, which is a very long time when you are standing in a stone corridor with an apex designation animal having a conversation in a language that only one of you speaks and only one of you needs to understand. Then Director Veth took a step back. The Vorrakh stayed where it was. Veth took another step. Then he turned and walked back through the gate, and the gate closed behind him, and the Vorrakh held its position for another 5 seconds, still watching the closed gate before the low boundary communication tone faded from its chest. Then it turned back towards Sarah Voss and sank back down, slowly, head to her level, and she put both hands on its face and said something again in the quiet voice she used. And the chest resonance that had shifted during Veth's approach came back to the lower, steadier frequency of before. I looked around the upper observation ledge. The 3 curriculum review board members were there. The 2 administrative oversight committee members, Veth Ossel from the Pain Collar Authorization Committee. All of them had been here for the full duration. They had watched the gate malfunction and the Vorrakh's charge and the halt. They had watched the approach and the hand and the 12 seconds and the 3 escalating collar settings. They had watched the head come down, the settling coat, the voluntary sitting. They had watched Director Veth walk onto the floor with the lead line and come back without it. They had watched a 740-kilogram apex designation animal under a fully operational pain collar system place itself, physically, between its program director and a cadet and decline to move. The nature of the silence on the upper observation ledge was the kind that happens when a room full of people with institutional authority have all processed the same information and arrived, independently and simultaneously, at the same conclusion, and none of them has yet decided who is going to say it first. I could see Director Veth below on the pit floor, walking back toward the primary access door. I could see the set of his back, the lead line in his right hand hanging loose. He was not going to the primary ledge stairway to continue the evaluation briefing. He was going to the access door. He was leaving the pit. The evaluation protocol requires a completion report filed within 12 hours of the assessment event, documenting the behavioral outcomes and the assessment scores for each cadet in the cohort. Director Veth did not file a completion report for yesterday's evaluation. He has not, as of this morning, filed one. I do not know what he intends to do about Sarah Voss. I do not know what the program review board, which will convene within the week based on what the authorized observers witnessed yesterday, will decide about the pain collar program's continued authorization at this facility. I do not know whether the quarterly evaluation format will survive the review, or whether the integration curriculum will be restructured, or whether any of the consequences I can see gathering on the administrative horizon will produce outcomes I would consider good ones. I have been doing this for 22 years, and I have learned not to predict what institutions will do when a thing they have built stops working in front of witnesses. I have seen it go well, and I have seen it go badly, and I have seen it produce outcomes that were neither just slow, quiet modifications that left the fundamental structure intact and called them reform. What I know is what I recorded. What I recorded is this. After Director Veth left the pit floor and the access door was sealed, and after the assessment observers had been escorted from the ledge to the debrief corridor by the garrison staff, and after the 14 cadets had been collected from the evaluation corridor by the senior cohort instructor. All 14 of them, quietly and without incident, because the Vorrakh had simply watched them file past and had not moved from the floor of the corridor. I remained on the upper observation ledge for a while. There was no protocol reason to stay. My shift duty was complete. The monitoring systems were running on automatic. There was nothing in my log that required my immediate presence. I stayed because I wanted to see what happened next. What happened next was this. Sarah Voss stayed in the evaluation corridor. No one had given her a directive to leave, and no one in the general management of the post-evaluation process had specifically addressed her or told her she was free to go, and so she had remained where she was, sitting on the stone floor with the Vorrakh's head in her lap, and she appeared to be talking to it. Not in the voice you use when you are nervous and filling silence with noise. In the voice you use when you are talking to something that is listening, when the talking itself is the point and the words are secondary to the fact of it. I could not hear the words from the upper ledge. I could only see the quality of it. Unhurried, easy, the inclination of her head and the movement of her hands, the way she would occasionally look directly at the animal's partially open eyes and then look away. Pacing the contact the way you do when you understand that too much direct attention can be as unsettling as too little. The Vorrakh was listening. Its eyes tracked occasionally toward her face when her voice changed slightly, and when she said something that apparently warranted it, the chest resonance deepened a fraction and then resumed its steady register. It lay on the stone floor of the cave that had been a cave before the garrison was built around it, on the floor of the evaluation pit that had seen 2 years of quarterly demonstrations and 11 months of collar escalations. And it was doing something I had begun to wonder in my more honest private moments, whether the program had removed from it permanently. It was resting. Not the flat, turned away, back to the room non-sleep I had been recording in the morning checks for 14 months. Resting in the real sense, eyes soft, breath in the long, slow pattern that the intake records had noted in the very first weeks of its time in this facility before the collar protocol became the primary management tool, before 3 handlers in sequence, and the 5 months of records in which the lighter coat phase appears once and then not again, resting the way it had rested when it was new to this place, and the place had not yet told it what it was going to be. I wrote in my board, 16-7. 43, voluntary rest state, SE corridor, contact with Cadet Voss, no prompting, duration ongoing at time of logging. I put my board down on the ledge railing and looked at them for a while. The garrison's undergrade evaluation pit is not a beautiful place. It is a repurposed geological feature lit for function and used for institutional purposes, and it smells of mineral water and 2 decades of animals that have been brought here and asked to demonstrate things. But the stone of those walls is very old, older than the garrison by orders of magnitude, and in the particular low-angle light of the rig fixtures at the end of the afternoon shift, the old stone has a color that is easy to overlook when you are up here watching compliance demonstrations and taking notes about collar escalation sequences. I noticed it yesterday evening. I noticed it because I was not looking at the usual things. I left the observation ledge at the 2nd hour of the evening shift. I walked up to the administrative records office and pulled Sarah Voss's file and added a notation to the prior animal handling field, which had been left blank and should not have been. Then I requested the collar activation logs from the pain collar console for the past 11 months. I am permitted this under the pen-warden data access provisions and attached them to yesterday's monitoring record with a clear cross-reference. Then I went to the holding corridor and checked the evening feeding status. The Vorrakh had eaten, not in response to a collar prompt. On its own initiative within the voluntary feeding window, the full measured ration at 17:45. I sat with that notation for a moment. Then I wrote in the notes field, first voluntary full ration feeding in 11 months. I do not know exactly when Sarah Voss was eventually escorted from the evaluation corridor, or by whom, or Whether anyone explained to her what had happened in the context of the program's history with that animal. I do not know whether she will be assigned to this facility in any formal capacity. I do not know what Director Veth's report, if he files one, will say. I know what my report says. I wrote it this morning in the standard format in all the correct columns with all the correct language. I also wrote this. I am a pen warden. I record what I see. What I saw yesterday was a pain collar activated at settings 1, 2, 3, 3 again, and 4 in sequence over a period of approximately 12 seconds, producing no measurable behavioral compliance, because the animal had made its decision before the first signal was sent. What I saw was 740 kilograms of apex designation creature, 2 years in this facility, 4 handlers, 11 months of voluntary feeding refusal, 14 months of progressive coat state deterioration, pressing its face into the hand of a young woman who had not stepped back when the gate opened. She had not stepped back. That is the thing I keep returning to. Everyone else had stepped back. The experienced handlers had stepped back in the end. The garrison staff on the ledge had stepped back. Director Veth had stepped back. The 40-centimeter gap, the 740 kilograms, moving in 6 seconds from the upper tunnel to the gate. Everyone who had processed those facts had moved accordingly. It was the rational response, the correct one, by any operational standard I have ever been trained to apply. Sarah Voss had moved toward the gate, not in panic and not in bravado. She had moved toward it the way you move towards something that needs a different kind of attention than it is currently receiving. She had done it the way she had done the hand gesture, not performing it, not demonstrating it, just doing it, with the clarity of someone who was not trying to pass a test or make a point or show anyone anything. She had done it because it was what the situation called for, and she had known what the situation called for, and she had known it the way she knew how to hold her shoulder loose and pace the eye contact, which was the way you know things that you learned from animals rather than from instruction manuals. Actual calm, not performed. The Vorrakh knows the difference. Every animal I have ever worked with knows the difference. And an animal that has lived under a pain collar for 11 months, that has been making a continuous, calibrated threat assessment of every living thing in its environment for 2 years, that has classified every person in this building as threat or neutral without exception, that animal knows the difference in its first breath. It is the last thing I have to record, and I want to record it precisely. When I came to the holding corridor this morning for the first shift check, the Vorrakh was asleep in the center of the room. Not the corner, not with its back to the door. In the center of the room, facing the access gate, in the way an animal sleeps when it is watching for something it expects to come through the gate it is facing. I noted this in the posture monitoring log. 0612 non-corner rest position, facing access gate, voluntary. Then I stood in the corridor for a while, and the Vorrakh breathed. And I thought about Sarah Voss somewhere in the upper garrison, probably at first meal, probably thinking about whatever a person thinks about the morning after they sat on a stone floor in a cave with an animal, 12 times their body weight for 3 hours. Maybe thinking about the review board. Maybe not thinking about any of it, just eating. The program review board will convene within the week. The assessment observers will give their accounts. Veth Ossel will present the collar compliance data I have been filing for 11 months. The record will be what it will be. I have been filing that record for 11 months, and I intend to file it for however many months follow, regardless of what the review produces. That is my job. That is what I have. But I looked at the Vorrakh facing the gate, and I thought, there is a young woman with a blank prior animal handling field in her enrollment paperwork who is going to find out, probably sooner than she expects, that a 740-kilogram apex designation animal ate a voluntary full-ration dinner last night, and that it slept facing her direction this morning, and that no one, not a pain collar set to 4, not a lead line, not a program director with 14 months of system confidence behind him, is going to change those two facts or the fact underneath them, which is that the Vorrakh has made its assessment of Sarah Voss and filed it in whatever column its neurology uses and is not, as far as I can determine, open to revision on the matter. I am a pen-warden. I record what I see. I am looking forward to what I see next.